Hello, you lovely painters. Welcome to another Watercolours with Caroline. Today we are going to paint a red cabbage, and this photo is by Kelly Wally, and I believe, reading her notes, that she took it on her mother's farm in Ireland in County Leitrim. I think it's Leitrim. Sorry if I pronounced it wrong. Beautiful photo of a red cabbage. So let's get your paints ready and a piece of paper. I'm working on 6x8 Arches cold press paper, and let's get painting. So we don't have many colors that we have to worry about here. We've got the lovely light green, which is made exactly like last week. You know, when we did the farm field last week, we had the phthalo green and the yellow.
Yeah.
So these greens are pretty much what we worked on last week. The red of the cabbage, we're going to use Quinacridone Rose, which is also permanent rose. It's the same thing, just a different name. A little bit of Quinacridone Magenta for the deeper colors. And if you have an alizarin crimson, I found for the center of this cabbage, alizarin crimson was just the best one. If you don't have alizarin crimson, you can mix a bit of bright red with your rose to kind of get it just a little bit. See this little highlight here? It's really, really red. It's the only kind of warmish red in the whole picture. Now, it's very easy to get this turned upside down because when you look at the drawing, you don't quite know which way up it goes. But you'll find it easier to work the same way I'm working. Then you won't get lost with where am I in the drawing. So I'm working with, if you can sort of orient it, this curly leaf here, and then this great big outer leaf on the bottom. If you get yours up the same way as mine, and I've made sure that I've got my sample up that way and my drawing up that way so that we don't get lost. You're not flipped around and wondering what I'm doing. And these are the stages we're going to work in. We're going to just wet the exterior and work wet in wet around the exterior. We're going to keep this very light area dry and this very light area dry. And then we're going to work on the middle. And then we'll come out and work on the exterior again. And the very last thing we'll do is these two very, very light leaves, because if we do those light leaves too early, we're going to make them too dark. We're going to lose the light. And we need to have these two beautiful and light and some areas like this. So I'll put my photo over there. This is my watercolor. Of course, never exactly the same as the photo. I wasn't going for that. And I'll put that over here and try and remember the steps. And I'm going to get my number 10 brush. I hope you've done yours quite big, 6x8. Big for us. I mean, we usually say quite small, but you really need that amount of space to get all this in. And I have drawn in a lot of lines, I know. Of the bright yellow, and to that I'm going to add a little bit of phthalo green, just like we did for the field last week. Now phthalo green is pretty intense, so you have to add just the tiniest bit at a time until you get that really nice bright green. And I'm going to have some yellow here too, just in case some of my bright green is too green. I can yellow it up a little bit. I've got those two colors. Now I want the Quinacridone Rose, or Permanent Rose it's called. And if you don't have Quinacridone Rose or Permanent Rose, you can use something else that has rose in its name. I'll get some of that ready. I'll need a lot for this cabbage, so I can get some big piles. If you have Quinacridone Magenta, that's a lovely one to use as well. Put that there, have that ready. If you don't have Quinacridone Magenta, I'll show you how you can mix something similar. I'll put Quinacridone Rose here, and I'll mix a little tiny bit of Phthalo Blue with it. A little bit of Phthalo Blue. It's not quite as intense as the Quinacridone Magenta, but you can see it's very, very similar. So if you don't have that one, you can mix a little bit of that. And I don't know if you have an alizarin crimson, but I found for the center of the cabbage, it was a beautiful color. So I'm going to put that here, and then I'm going to mix a color that could work if you don't have it. Let's move that out of the way a minute. Just put it down on the table. Now, alizarin is considered a cool red because it veers a bit more towards the blue, but it's quite warm for this cabbage. Now, if you don't have alizarin, let's try mixing Rose, which is more pink than the alizarin. And I'm going to mix a little bit of cadmium red with it and see if I can make it a bit more like alizarin with a little bit of cadmium red in. It's not as rich, is it? Let's try a little bit of magenta in there too. Magenta, rose, cadmium red. It's getting there. So if you don't have alizarin, some magenta, some rose, a little bit of cadmium red, and you're going to have a bit more of a bright red that you can use for the center. There's always a mixing solution as long as you have a few colors. Now let's put those where I can reach them and get my painting back. And I'm making sure it's up the right way. So now I'm going to wet all of the outer leaves because I want to do wet and wet, but I'm going to be very careful when I come up against those light leaves not to get them wet. My brush, although I'm using clean water, my brush is a little bit pink still from all that mixing. Now that doesn't matter because we're going to put a lot of color on here anyway, so. Now I've got to remember that I've turned it upside down when I start painting, but it's going to be easier for me to wet the rest of it if I turn it upside down. Remembering to keep those nice light outer leaves dry. And this is pretty much the only wet and wet we're going to do, the start. It's to sort of make the outer leaves more blurry and less distinct than the center, which is darker and more detailed. Yeah, I'm just going to tip it. I can see a big dry spot here. That's why I tip. You can see if you come up to the edge there. And I'll get it back up the right way for the photo. And I will start with the green. I'm going to give that brush a really, really, really good wash because it's even a bit, I've got a bit of soap here too, as it's very pink. And grab my number 8 brush. No, it's my number 6. My number 8 brush has gone walkabouts and I haven't even started yet. No, here it is. It's right. I found it. That's why I got this little brush stand. Right, green. I'm going to start with the nice bright green that I mixed up. And I'm not going to put it everywhere because I want to put some pink in. I'm sort of judiciously putting it, thinking about I'm going to put some pink in there too. I'm just going to take a little bit of yellow that I mixed and I'm going to just have a bit that's just yellow there. Go back to the green. And when this is dry, we will be putting darker greens in and a bit more detail. So just remember, this is your first layer, your nice light wet in wet layer. And again, I'm going to turn it because I find it much easier than lifting my arm up. It's also easier for you to see because if I lift my arm up to do the top, I'll have my arm in front of the camera, which will make it difficult for you. Grabbing a bit of the yellow again. Want some brighter leaves here. A bit of the green. I'm not washing my brush in between grabbing the yellow or the green. That will help blend the two together. I tend not to wash my brush very often when I'm painting, unless I pick up a really different color. I'll be picking up the pink, which means I will actually go to a cleaner brush. I'll switch to my other brush. That's a lot of my green in. Let's put it back up the right way so I don't forget. So now I'm going to switch to my number 4 brush, which is perfectly clean. I have some pink water here and I'm going to go for the rose first, the rose that I've got here, and start putting in a bit of rose in the veins. Now the rose is nice and intense, and if you've got your green light enough, it should work with it just fine. If you've left a few light spaces that are barely painted, even better. And again, this is your first layer, so over the top of this, if you like later, you can put a bit more in the way of veins if you find that you need to. In some areas, I'm going to add just a bit more rose so that I have some sort of rose shadows. No, we're going to lose track, aren't we? I'm going to have to keep switching this around so I don't smudge with my hand. I'm painting this time with just the point of my brush. I'm lifting my brush up a little bit and just using the point so I get some more delicate strokes. Now this is where I'm going to go to a smaller brush again, to my number 2 brush, and my magenta or mix. And for some of them, I just want to add a little bit more dark, especially near the light leaves, a little bit of magenta. And of course we can add a little bit of that later too, if you want extra. Not everywhere. This is just in some spots. Mostly it's good to have them close to the light leaves that are in surrounding the inner cabbage. You can see how intense the Quinacridone Magenta is, that it will really just invade the green and the rose. I'm looking at my reference photo. This area here is quite dark, so I'm putting in some a bit more dark magenta there, and I can work on that later if I see areas that need a bit more here. And there's going to come a point where you can't work wet in wet anymore. It's going to be too dry, and that's when you need to stop. I'm cleaning my brush. And I can also, if I want to, I could do a bit of lifting out if I wanted some light. You'll be amazed at how light this green will go when it dries, as long as you put it on fairly light. And when you put some darker colors on and some darker greens, it's going to look very, very light. I'm just taking a little bit of light out in some places with what's called a thirsty brush, just a bit of lifting. Now, a lot of these colors that we've just used, Quinacridone Rose, Quinacridone Magenta, Phthalo Green, they're all staining colors, so you're not going to be able to do much lifting of them. And I'm just making sure the edges are not wet, don't have paint on. I'll do a little bit of lifting. And then we'll just leave our outer leaves to dry. Now they will look quite intense at the moment because it's wet and we don't have all of this dark in the middle. When you get all of this dark in the middle and you put some more dark around the light leaves, that's when all of this looks less intense, when you have the dark. But right now all we have is white paper in the middle, so it's a little bit misleading when you just have the white in the middle. The good thing is, because we've left this dry border around the center, we can work on the center and we don't have to wait for the outside to dry, and we don't have to dry it artificially. The next thing we'll be doing is going right in and working on the center of this cabbage with the dark colors. So I'll let you, if you're painting away, I'll let you catch up with your wet in wet. And don't worry if it's too light. You can add a lot of extra color when it's dry, no problem. Right, and I have to just remind myself what colors I need to mix up for the center. I've already got the alizarin crimson ready, and I need the Quinacridone Magenta, and then we'll mix up a nice purple, and we'll mix up some soft purples. And all these colors will be used again, so I'm not going to get rid of any of them. We'll be using the green again, be using a little bit of the yellow mixed with blue. We'll be using the rose again, so we need to have them all ready. I'm going to make sure I have my Quinacridone Magenta. That's an important one. And I'm going to mix up a lovely violet. Let's move my painting out the way. I'm bad at splashing my paintings. So a lovely, lovely violet is Quinacridone Magenta with Phthalo Blue. If you want any beautiful violets, those two colors are going to give them to you. And you can make that violet darker by adding more blue, or you can make it lighter by adding a little bit of rose. So I've got quite a dark one there. I have some rose over here. So I'm going to add to that rose some Cobalt Blue, because that's going to make me a very soft violet. And if I want the leaves less intense, not so violet, I can use that one there. The Cobalt and the Rose. It's just slightly softer. It's not as staining. You can get a lighter cut, sort of glazed color with it. And then over here, alizarin crimson. There's mine. It's almost like a blood red alizarin, like a garnet. I want some of that for the center. And I think I'll have a very blue, the cobalt blue, mostly cobalt blue. And I'll just add a little bit of rose to that. So it's a much more bluey color when I want sort of blue shades. You can tell, let's get these are the same two colors, rose with cobalt blue, but this one has a lot of rose in, and this one here has a lot of cobalt blue in. So you can get a different tone to your color just by adding more blue or more rose or more pigment or more water. So all of those things, I've got all that ready. Bring my cabbage back. So we're going to work on right in the center of this cabbage, and what I want to get is this highlight here. And so what I've put on my instructions is to put a little bit of water here to kind of keep this area a little bit more diluted. And I just mean a little bit, and it helps you lift off the paint too if it gets too intense there. So that's sort of right here. I'm going to put just a little bit of water just there, just as a start, just so that I can keep that area a little bit lighter than the other areas. And I'm going to go in with the smaller brush, number 4, and the alizarin crimson. And I just got to get my brush going, and just needs a little bit of encouragement. There we go. And for this first layer, I'm just doing alizarin crimson. We'll be working up this layer with some other colors to darken it and add detail. But right now, I'm on dry paper, apart from that little bit in the center that is wet, and that's to keep that area a bit dry. Not dry, sorry, a bit light. And you'll notice I'm not painting close to it straight away. I'm painting in the dark areas close to the light edges. And carefully, I've got lots of time. My paper's dry. That little bit in the middle is wet, so it gives me a lot of time to work. And then I'm getting edging. Here's what I'm doing right now. I'm actually giving my brush a bit of a wash and taking a bit of the moisture off so that I'm not adding a lot of water. Now that this center is wet, I don't want to be adding a lot of water to this center. But with my almost dry brush, I can just encourage a little bit of that alizarin crimson into the center, so that it's light at the center, and it's sort of very light crimson, but it's not going to be as dark as the outer area. And there's lots of other colors to come. Right behind this center here is almost black. We'll be putting on some layers. Down here is very, very dark. We've got shadows along the side, and then we've got purple shadows here. It's easier to do all those later rather than all at once. We can't, it's very tricky to do it all at once, especially on a small painting like this. If you start to add colors wet in wet, if you're not careful, it's too dry to do that, and you get very hard edges. Now the cabbage leaf that's surrounding this under here is a very blue purple. Now we're going to put a pinkish purple in the middle, and then a bluish purple around the edges, and we'll also put some other layers on later. So I have that. Right here is the lilac I mixed up with mostly Quinacridone Rose, a little bit of Cobalt Blue. And this is softer, this color, so I want to start with that color around the middle here, diluting it out a little bit. On dry paper still. And I want to switch to the lilac that is still Quinacridone Rose and Cobalt Blue, but this one is more blue. I've switched to the one that has more Cobalt Blue in it. And I'm not using Phthalo Blue to make this violet because Phthalo Blue is too intense. It's great for those deep, deep violets when we do some darks. It will be beautiful for that. Now I'm just letting the blue violet flood into the pinky violet. I'm going to switch back to the pinky violet now. No washing my brush. I don't want to get water on my brush. That will dilute everything too much. Don't need to clean my brush. I just want to get some of that more pinky violet mixing with that blue violet. Wet and wet for a painterly effect. We don't have to make this cabbage look like the photograph. We can make it look like a beautiful watercolor painting. And that's something to really remember when you're trying to do something from a photograph. Translate a little bit into a painting rather than photorealism. Now we have the leaf that curls back is quite a bit lighter, so we're going to just leave that dry, and then we'll be painting on that to make it stand out. If you do it all in one go, you're likely to get it too dark or the wrong color. And if you look, and I know I've just said you don't have to make it photorealistic, but it's nice to kind of follow along a little bit what you've got here, but you don't have to be too detailed. But this leaf that folds back here, you can see that it's a sort of a much more pinky color than this under here. So it's better to do that later when this part's dry, so that you get that change of color and you get that crisp dry edge, because anytime you have a crisp dry edge, it shows up through all your layers. Right, let's get mine around the right way. Now the leaf over here is the same sort of in that it has quite a bit of pinky violet on it and going to blue. So I want to start with some pinky violet. This has got the rose, quite a bit of rose in it. On dry paper. And I'm going to get some just water on my brush, just water, no paint on my brush, because I want to dilute that pinky violet out just with some water. Bring it around here. That makes it much lighter as it comes around here. And I'm going to get a little bit more paint on my brush, a little bit more pinky violet. So then I've got this light area right here. And then I'm going to switch to the blue violet, one that has way more cobalt blue in it. And I want to have that wet and wet coming down here, under here. I'm going to get a little bit more blue on my brush, just dip my brush in the blue. I want to get a nice strong shadow in here. Back into the, no washing my brush, back into the pinky blue violet and coming up under here. Now we're sort of going to find the sections one by one of the cabbage. Now I've got dried my brush on the sponge, so it's pretty dry. And I just want to pull some of this just upwards from there, upwards motion, because the veins come upwards from there. It's looking pretty colorful right now, isn't it? We're going to dull it down a little bit soon. And I'm going to just suck up a little of that color with my thirsty brush. And I think, yeah, that's still wet enough. I want that highlight back here and suck a little bit of that color up to get that highlight here with my thirsty brush. If it's still wet and your brush is very dry or just mildly damp, then you can suck up a little bit of color, which makes things look round when you do that. Even here, there's some highlights coming around here. Use my little, what's called eradicator brush. And just take a couple of linear highlights on the center. To give it some shape. So one by one, we're going through the leaves and figuring them out. We've always got to try and work in a dry space because our background is wet. Want to keep these outer leaves as dry for as long as possible so we can have them nice and light. But what we can work on next, if this area is starting to dry, we can work on putting in the pink and blue shadows coming up here. And what we're going to do is blend those shadows up here away to nothing, because later we'll be putting a little bit of very, very light green on the edge here. Don't want to do it right now because you will get confused as to what's light green, what's dark green, where the shadow's going to go under the leaf and so forth. So under here, we're going to do the same as we did over here. We're going to put some pink, sort of rosy. Actually going to see this mix here. Going to put a bit more rose in it to make it even more pink. Get that pinky color. And we're going to do wet on wet. So some pinky rose. Coming up, comes up to that light leaf at the edge there. And what I mean about blending it out, I'm getting a nice clean wet brush now, and I'm gonna pull that rose up here just with a slightly wet brush. That's there. I'm going to get that bluey violet, the cobalt blue, and or whatever nice soft violet you have, and work that wet in wet into that rosy violet color. Pretty. It's going to be, we're going to go very dark under here, so just putting that there as the first layer. Going back to the rosy color. And behind the leaf here is fairly blue. So I want to put more cobalt blue in my violet that's very cobalt blue, and do this area here pretty blue. And the leaf actually has a very white edge to it. So if you can, don't paint right up to the green. Leave a white edge to that leaf. I'm getting to here. Now, what I'm going to do when I get to here is I'm going to dip in my green that I made. Actually, I'm going to make a different green. I lied. I'll make a different green. I'm going to put Cobalt Blue on that light green I made, and some of my Azo Yellow. And I'm going to make a slightly bluer green, not so acidic as the Phthalo Green. It's slightly different. And I'm just going to get a little bit of that green. And the reason the cobalt with the Azo Yellow will work better is there's cobalt in both those colors. There's cobalt in the violet and cobalt in the green I just made. So they'll work better together. Then I'm going back to the cobalt and violet. I'm bringing those up again. Wash my brush. Nice and clean, a little bit wet. And I'm going to use a little bit of a wet brush to bring those colors over here. And just let them all mix together. I'm going to get a little tinge of rose on the tip of my brush. I'm going to chuck that in there just for good measure. Wet, clean brush again, and just soften that edge up. We're going to come back later with some very light green on that edge. We're also going to put some really dark color in over here. So you can see we're working it up very gradually and working dry areas and letting others dry up. Now I think my center, and I hope yours too, my center is fairly dry. If I put a dark color next to that, I don't think it's going to bleed on it. So I want to get a really nice dark color to put in behind here. Well, let's go to that violet I made with, this is Phthalo Blue and Quinacridone Magenta, so it's already quite dark. And I'm going to add a little bit of Ultramarine Blue to that. It should darken it up a little bit further. A little bit more Phthalo Blue. Maybe a little bit more magenta. Now it's not quite as dark as the photo shows, but it's a good start. Little brush. I think I'll get my number 2 brush for this because I'm going in a small space. And I'll show you on the photo where I'm going. Into this corner here. And we're going to sort of blend it onto the center. And it will probably need another layer after this one to darken it up. But I want a lovely, lovely dark edge against the light leaves. So less water with your mix, more pigment. Still has to be liquid. It shouldn't be dry, but it should be nice and intense so you can get lovely dark in here. There. Now, there's no transition here to this part, and there will be later. But I want to make sure that this center is perfectly dry before we do any of that sort of transitioning over here. What we can do is, there is a leaf. Let's grab mine. there's a leaf over the top here of a darker one here. So we can use another layer of alizarin crimson with a little bit of this dark that we've just made to put that one in. I'll go back to my alizarin crimson. And 2 layers of a color is going to make it considerably more intense and darker. I'm going to put that in first. And as it comes over to this right-hand side, it's less intense. I've got a clean wet brush and I'm just going to agitate it over with no paint on my brush, just to make it a little lighter on the right. Again, that's to make the cabbage look round. So I'm lifting off a little bit of the paint on the right. Now I'm going into that dark paint that I just made, and into the wet alizarin crimson, I'm going to dot it along the edge here on the left. Just dot that dark color in and let it flow into the alizarin, just on the left, not on the right. There will need to be more shading put on probably later, but that's a start to get it looking round and to get it looking dark. And you can see just another layer of alizarin and a little bit of that dark, and you're starting to get some intensity of color. Now I still want to, with my clean, thirsty brush, I still want to just control that light on this side and pull it back a little bit. And when this is dry, I can put a little bit more shadow along that edge of this cabbage leaf too. A lot of watercolor painting is controlling the paint after you've put it down with your brush and using different amounts of water on your brush to control the paint once you've put it down. I think a lot of people don't explain that or realize that it's not just about putting the paint down, it's about lifting it off a lot of the time, moving it around and manipulating it. So another place there's quite a deep shadow is on this side here, where especially where it comes up against the light leaves, and keep your lines nice and curved in the direction of the cabbage to keep it looking round. Now what I'm doing here is a little bit of negative painting. I'm putting the dark shadow in back here, and then I'm painting the other side of a vein. I'm going to use my wet brush again to manipulate the paint. Clean wet brush, and that paint that I've just put there, I'm going to pull that down with a clean wet brush so that I don't have a hard edge everywhere, just where that vein is, so that now I'm painting veins in that part of the cabbage. Like I've gone to my much softer violet, the one with the cobalt, and I'm doing the same thing but using the softer violet, putting some shadow under here. And I think yours should be dry enough to do that. Mine certainly is. Somebody always phones about this time during a lesson. My husband's really good at grabbing the phone though. Right, now I'm just grabbing a little bit more rose and I'm dropping it in wet here because I want a bit more of that rosy color here. It didn't show through enough, so I can put a bit more on this layer. Now what you have to remember is this cabbage is round, so the veins will go this direction here, but then when they come to this side, they're going to start going in the other direction because it's round. So if you put them all going in the same direction, it won't look it won't look round. And some of them will be more distinct than others. So you don't want them all really, really distinct, just some of them. So for instance, these ones here are coming in this direction. And I don't want a whole bunch of them because then it's going to look too stripy. I just want to put an indication of where they would be just under there. And you can see I'm switching now from bluey violets to pinky violets to different colors so that I get a nice variation on here. And get my photo. And I can see that. I'm going to switch to my number 6 brush. A little bit more of the rose. I can see here there's a bit more pink here, so I want to put a bit more pink on. Again, clean, damp brush, manipulate that in a little bit. Add a bit more pinky color there. And here as well. Wet brush, manipulate it in. And down here, very, very, very dark. So go to my number 4 brush again and put some dark in there, some of that dark, dark color. What I can do is I have that really dark violet. If I add a little bit of the Phthalo Green to it, I'm going to make it even more dark. And still within the same color family that we're using. Not a lot of Phthalo Green, just a little bit. But I wanted a slightly grayer dark over here. A little bit more, tiny bit more Phthalo Green. Just to make a more intense dark. It's the complementary of red, green. So whenever you want to get a good gray or a nice dark gray, use your complementary colors. They work beautifully to make grays and dark colors and blacks that work with what you're painting. Now again, I've come to a point here where I want to use just a wet brush to pull this color out so that it just fades into the lightness of the leaf here. We get some of the darks and it helps you find the areas of the painting. Now I'm going to, it's hard for me to keep remembering to move my painting out of my way of my mixing. So let's get some more darks. So I'm going to go back to my whole mixing procedure. I have my Quinacridone Magenta. I'm going to add my Phthalo Green straight away to see what that gives me. Gives me a lovely dark color. See, just adding green and magenta. They're both transparent. They're both highly staining. They're complements of each other, and you can get, oh, look at that lovely dark color you get with them. I'm going to add just a tiny bit of Ultramarine Blue just to give it a more blue-gray look. That's a good dark. And the beauty is it's all the colors that we're using, so you're not introducing some other color into the mix. So another place we have a dark is over here. And although we work light to dark most of the time, it's very helpful to get some of your darkest darks in early so that you can figure out where you're going and how dark some things need to be. Now this one is still wet that I use, and I don't mind that because I'm just letting this new dark that I've just mixed just flow into that one that I just put on there. The one at the top here is more magenta-y, so I'm going to get a bit of my magenta and mix it over here with that dark on this side of it. And as I come up from where I was painting up here, this is a much more magenta-y sort of dark. So I'm going to come up here with that more pinky color and around. Wash my brush. It's just damp, clean brush, and I'm going to ease that color up here. Go back, get a little bit more color. Take it up against this light edge here. And then bring it down. Now you have to make sure that this area here is fairly dry before you do this. If it's not dry, it will tell you, because your paint will flood into that, and then you'll have to just use a Kleenex and dab it and dry it and go back and do some more later. So I hope you can maybe see on the camera that this gray dark down here is a very greeny gray, and this one up here is a more magenta-y gray. And at any point you can dip in the other color. I'm going to dip in the more green gray here, and just here I'm just going to dip it in just like that, just tip it in, and it will blend into the magenta-y gray that I have. Into a smaller brush, go back to my number 2, because it's very dark in here too. I'm going to the more greeny dark. I'm putting that in here. Just along there. Wet brush, clean, and then just blend that in with a wet brush so it's sort of just fades out. All of that is going to make the center really pop out at the viewer. They're really going to focus on that when they have all those darks to guide them. There's quite a few more darks that we need to put in, but you can't put them all in at once. I'm just testing how dry this is. It's fairly dry on mine, so I want a more bluey dark. So I'm just going to get a bit of ultramarine blue and just add a bit of blue to this side of that dark. See, I've got a lot of darks all in one little place. And at this edge of the leaf here, it is pretty dark. So I've got that more bluey gray with just a touch of ultramarine in it to get very dark in here. It's not dark right out at the edge, it's dark right under this top leaf. And what's going to make that leaf look light is this lovely dark that you're going to put in here. I want it to fade out as I come up that leaf. So wet brush with no paint on. Just lifting that paint up so that it fades out. I don't have too much of a hard edge. I am going to make a little bit of a vein, and I put it there. And wet brush, fade it out. So we're starting to model a few of the veins as we go in with the darks. Most of the painting on this is done at the center of the cabbage. you've done pretty much all of the exterior, except you need to put a little bit of shading on. But the detail is in the center here. And you have to gauge like which area is dry and which area is still wet. I want that more bluey dark, and right in here is very dark too. So let's get right in here with some dark, and actually very much under that part of the cabbage has got a very dark shadow. Clean wet brush, just soften that edge a little bit. And again, you're making it look more round all the time as you do that. Still, it's amazing as this dries up how you can still see some areas need to be darker. Just as this drying up, I can see this side really needs a bit more dark. Wet brush, easing in the color, a little bit of blue, cobalt blue, soft blue. So I'm going to take a little bit of soft cobalt blue to negatively paint these veins. I'm painting between these veins. And right under this leaf here is very dark. And it's just about time to come back and do some work on the middle. You're probably racing to catch up with me. So you can have a little, or you've just given up. I don't know. I'll give you a little bit of time for a moment, and then we're going to work on the center. And what I think I will do right now is, while you're catching up a little bit and working on your shadows, I'm going to dry the whole thing so that I can work on the border around here as well, putting in a bit more color, a few shadows. And there's some transitional places like right here where I need to blend some of that transition. So I want to get that completely dry. So I'm going to go to my hairdryer and I'll let you catch up a little bit. So this beautiful center of the cabbage, we've got the bright red on and we've got some of the shadow, but there needs to be some purple shadow coming around here, and also some modeling of these veins on the cabbage. This one is quite a positive one coming down here, and that could be done with some alizarin crimson as positive painting. Most of the rest of this can be done as negative painting, where you're painting the violet color where the veins aren't, if you know what I mean. And then we need to sort of get this dark and this area going into the dark transitioned a little bit. And then there's a lot of other places while that's drying. There's all these nuances on the leaves. Right up against this light here are these darks in the center of these leaves. So we've got to get some of those on, especially this one here, this one that curls under here. So we're going to put some glazes on, and that will really make these light leaves stand out and give the outer leaves a bit more color and direction. And again, we can do some negative painting here to leave some of the pink veins showing. So if you're painting this part, for instance, you'll be painting this shape inside the vein and leaving the veins light, and that's where you get the light colors showing up. So we've got a little bit to do. We've been painting for an hour. I hope I'm going to put that somewhere I can see it. Hope you're keeping up okay and not getting lost. So much of this is learning brush control, and I kind of keep emphasizing that, how you have to put the paint on and then control it with your brush. You might need a slightly wet brush or a fairly wet brush or a bit of a dry brush. That is the real key to what, as you progress in watercolor, is controlling all of the paint with your brush. And it doesn't necessarily have to be exactly how you put it down. You control it after it's on the paper. That's the wonderful thing about having sizing on watercolor paper. Sizing is the gelatin layer that they put on to stop the paint and the water absorbing into the paper, so that you have a lot of time before it absorbs in to work with it and manipulate it. And that's why they put sizing on watercolor paper. Otherwise, your paint would just like suck straight into the paper and you wouldn't get any edges to anything. So work with your paper and your sizing and your brush. And we're going to start by putting the purple on this area and then working with the same purples to get some of the shadows in the outer leaves. So you want to have whatever purples you like working with, if you've got some lilacs, but I'm going to just keep working mainly with the rose and the cobalt blue, because I can mix a nice range of violets with that, and they're all soft. I can add a little bit of magenta to that if I want it a bit stronger, or I can have magenta and phthalo blue if I want a really strong one. So I'll mix a few of those, a bit more of them, because of course I'm running low on them now that I've been painting. So I've got one that's a lot of cobalt blue. I love Quinacridone Rose. It just makes so many beautiful colors as a mixing color. Really versatile. I'm going to make a puddle of very rosy violet, another one a very blue violet, and have those ready to continue. The other thing that you will need to continue on is a green that is more of a vegetable green. So that was the one I mixed using my Azo Yellow, or you can use cadmium, and Cobalt Blue. That makes a more vegetable green. And of course, if you add more Cobalt Blue to it, you're going to get a darker green. So I like to have half of my little mixing well, one sort of variation of it, and the other half of the mixing well a different variation. I've got a bit more color ready. Clean up my brushes with fairly clean water. And we're going to go into the center here, get my number 4 brush and some of that lilac I just mixed up. And I think I might start with my very, very thin brush and the alizarin crimson and do that positive vein that goes through the center. So I don't forget about it. There's a one that comes through here. I might take a little bit of that over here and over here for there's sort of on the side of the vein, there's a shadow side and a highlighted side to it. So I'm just sort of putting in the shadowish side. And that was just my alizarin crimson. Now my number 4 brush, I'm going to do some of the shading that is violet. So let's start back here. And it's fairly dark where it meets Unfairly Blue, where it meets the shadow back here. And not much detail can be seen back there. So let's start with that bit. It's dry paper, so you've got a lot of working time when you have dry paper. A lot of time to take color off, move it around, get it working for you. Now I'm going to have to take that color way up into the shadow here, otherwise I'm going to get too much of a line. And then I can add a bit more up there. Now this is where I can do the taking off. I've got the color on, got lots of time to work, and I can take a little bit off to round out that cabbage leaf. Little brush again, get more of that color. Want to do the other side here. And down under here. This is quite blue, this violet, because of course there's the red underneath, so you need a different color on top for the red underneath to show through. I'm leaving this negative painting of the vein here, and now damp brush, spreading that out a little bit. Going into my pinky violet now, adding a little bit of pinky violet to that. Clean brush, just ease that in. And then we have to be careful to keep that round shape. So each time you put some more violet on, it's got to get a little bit lighter, which means add a little bit more water to your paint. I've just added a little bit more water to it here. It's darker around the edges here. So as I come down to the edge, I can put a bit more dark on. And then lighter up near the center. Wet brush, manipulate. And near the edge here, darker. Again, I can't just leave it how I put it on. It's too stark. I have to get that brush with very little water or paint on, and I have to manipulate that so it's not so stark. A little bit more of the blue lilac. And we can't lose the highlights, so I've got to be very careful to make sure that I use my wet brush, very clean wet brush, to keep that highlight. And still kind of dark near the edge. You're probably seeing in this one me do more brush manipulation than you have ever seen. And I tend to not do too much for a class because it is probably a very tricky thing to get used to. Now I'm going back into that wet paint with a little bit of dark paint because I want that shadow a little bit darker. And again, then I have to take a little bit off. Back and forth, a little bit in, a little bit off, until you get what you want. There's sort of a bit of a crease just there. And then we've almost got it. We've almost got the, I should zoom in a little bit so you can see a little bit better, shouldn't I? So we've almost got the look of the center of the cabbage with that roundness, with a little bit of the veins showing. Of course, we don't see any here. You can't see any in the photo. And we don't need to see large areas of the veins either, just some suggestion. Now back here, I want to put a little bit more blue. It's still wet enough. I can just add a little bit more shadow. Because the more color you get on there, the more you realize you need more shadow. It's a gradual thing. There's a little bit more there. And there. Edges, anywhere there's overlap, you will have more shading. Even now down here, where this top leaf crosses the bottom leaf, this edge will be shaded. And down here too, down near this edge. We can put, now that this is dry, and the first layer is dry, we can add even more shading. Again, I'm not going to leave it like that. I've put the shading color on, dried, cleaned my brush, dried it a little bit, and now I'm going to ease that color up from the edge so that we have the dark at the edge, and then I can take the dark and I can just drop it into that wet paint and do a little bit more easing. So back and forth until you get it just how you want it. It's like modeling clay, putting a little bit on, taking a little bit off, scraping a bit back, adding a bit more, working with it until you get the shape. A bit more shadow here. And then I want to just leave that center for now and work on some of the outer leaves. I think it would be easier, because I don't want to put my hand up over that. I think it'd be easier to work on the ones down here for now, so I don't put my arm over what I've just painted. There's this area here where there's some shadow here and here. Now you can see probably that this shadow here is the bluey gray shadow, and this shadow up here is the more pinky violet color. So we're going to switch back and forth, and you look at this dark shadow here, very dark bluey gray to blue to green to sort of a pinky violet. So there's a lot of different colors in these shadows. And let's take them one at a time. And remember that we're going to leave the veins showing as we do those shadows. Oh, I like this pinky violet, but I need a greeny pinky violet. So let's get a bigger brush, Caroline. You can't mix with a little tiddly brush like that. Get some Cobalt Blue into that Azo that I left there, Azo Yellow. And now I want to get a little bit of that pinky violet and mix it with that green. Complements again, complementary colors. Look what I get. I get that lovely pinky gray color. See, I just added a little bit of that rosy violet to that green that I made. Same, there's Cobalt Blue in this one, there's Cobalt Blue in this one, so they're going to mix just fine. And I'm going to get some lovely pinky grays, and that's what I need for this one of these here. I'm looking, tell you where I'm looking right here. And let's do a test. Let's grab a piece of paper and put the piece of paper there and get a bit of that pinky gray. And does it kind of match? I think it kind of does. Might add a little bit more pink to it, just a tiny bit more. Let's try it again. I think it might be better with, no, it's both of those are okay. So green and red gives you browns and pinky greys. So I've mixed that up, and that's where I want to start. I want to start right here with that color I've just mixed up, and I'm going to do negative painting again. That means I'm going to leave the vein showing and paint that shadow that's inside of it. Carefully, one shadow at a time in that pinky grey that I just mixed with the green and the pinky violet. And at any time, I'll show you what I just did. I got a bit of that green from over here and I mixed it to the side of that pinky grey so that I've got another greeny pinky grey that's slightly different for mixing or painting this one here. When you look at this whole painting, it looks like you couldn't tackle it. But if you just tackle it one little section at a time like this and break it down into little pieces, that's when you can do it. You never have to do the whole thing at once. Don't have to look at the whole thing at once. Just concentrate on this area. So I've done this one here. Now I want to move over and do a little bit here. I'm going to use my wet brush. I want to soften this edge here. I'm going to go to the green. And part of this here is actually quite green. I'm going to use that for the green here. And then back to, just going to go into that pinky violet and add a little bit more pinky violet just here. You don't have to stick to the same color. You can let them mix wet in wet on the paper. You can blend some in with a wet brush. You can start to make it up when you get a feel for how this goes. You can actually start to invent some of it if you want to. This gets greener as these come out. And then yellower. So I'm taking a bit more yellow, adding it to my green, and having a yellower sort of, well, that's a bit too much. Again, you think this is going to take forever, but you don't have to do them all. You just have to do a few of them, and you can leave some just wet in wet. Oh, I don't need to go over here for now. I need to go back to where I was, where I started. I'm getting carried away. Next to this one here, there was quite a dark green one, so I've mixed a little bit more cobalt blue in with that green. I'm going to put a darkish green shadow in here. A little bit of water to just soften it out a bit. I'm going back to my very blue violet. Again, that's a little bit intense, so a little bit of water on my brush to take that down a bit. And dry my brush off a little bit. Pull that in there. And it's getting darker blue as it comes in here. So I can go a little bit darker with the blue here. And I don't have to put every little leaf and vein, just enough to tell the story of what this is. And remember, your viewer will fill in loads of this with their own eyes and their own brain. They will invent the rest of the picture quite happily if you give them enough clues. You just have to give them enough clues that they can do that. Quite a dark shadow in here, a little bit of a curl back here. And then I'm going to go to back to the pinky greeny gray color. I've already got it quite dark in here with my first layer, so I can add a little bit more to that. The more dark that you put against the light edges, the lighter the edges are going to look. Back to that pinky greeny gray color. I find negative painting very calming. Just one little, it's almost like a triangle each time, just one little bit at a time, one little triangle. It's all you have to worry about. You don't have to really look at any other part there. It doesn't matter if it's not the same as your photo. You just need to get the rhythm of kind of how the veins go, if you know what I mean. And not all of them are dark, so you only really need to do the ones that are close to the center where there's shadow that comes out to sort of more bright green. My brush flying across the table. This one over here fades from a pinky violet to a green color, so we can do the fade wet in wet. Start with the pinky violet and switch to the green and just let them blend wet in wet together. If you have them both the same wetness, here's the key, have them both, if you can gauge that, they won't fight, they will just kind of gently blend into each other. But if one is wetter than the other, there will be a little bit of a tussle going on, and you might get some flowing where you don't want it to. So you have to kind of make a judgment that you get them just the same wetness. Now I've got that. I'm going to add a little bit more yellow to the green. A little bit brighter. I might even add a touch. I think I will add a touch of Phthalo Green, because that really makes it acidic, that strong acidic green. And for this corner here, I've got some brighter, that the phthalo makes it brighter. I'm going to put some brighter green in that corner to really make sure that that corner is filled. Now we've gone from here to here, this edge here. Now when we get round here, look how dark this is. There's a little bit of a dark curl of the leaf there, so it's going to be a little bit tricky. But what we have is we should have a nice dry edge up against here. And if you notice on these leaves, the edge of them is very, very white. So we can leave that just dry edge white so that they stand out. And that means we can work up against wet paint, and it's not going to flow into the previous wet paint because we have a little tiny dry edge to protect it. Now, what I want is for that dark curl under the leaf, I want the dark magenta and phthalo blue, violet, with the tiniest touch of phthalo green in it to get it dark, and maybe a touch of ultramarine blue, because just in here, smaller brush, number 2, just in here is pretty dark. We can put, where it's darkest is close to the edge of this leaf. We can put the darkest area in first. Remember, keep the edge of this cabbage leaf dry so it has a light area. And then we're going to go lighter. I'm going to go back to my Cobalt Blue and Rose Lilac mix and bring that in to make it a little bit lighter than the one I just put in there. Not so intense. Keeping that edge completely dry so we don't get any blending with the other one that we just did. Have the Cobalt Blue Violet again. And I'm going to go into that really deep violet. I'm going to put that just into that wet Cobalt Blue just here so that it blends down into the wet paint. Blend it down with some more of the violet, the light violet. Now I've got hardly any violet on my brush, and I'm just doing a little bit of very light almost dry brush, so that I've got a difference between the dark area and the light area. Actually, this can have a little bit of green in it. I've just got a little bit of green on my brush. I'm just dropping it in to what I've got there. And I think, as I don't want to like get my arm up here under the camera, I can put a little bit more down here in where I'm working, not lifting my arm up crazily so it's uncomfortable and obscuring your view. A little bit more dark just there. I wanted to just do a little bit of this here before we move on to the other side. Well, this is quite light shadow here, so I've diluted my paint, diluted my blue violet, just to get a little bit of shadow in here. A little bit of green. Just not too much green, and it's quite yellowy green. And this is how you form the veins, by using what you put on originally and using it to help you do some negative painting. A bit of pink in there now. Oh, I need my very thin liner brush. And some rose, some Quinacridone Rose. And It's going to get some, actually I think I prefer magenta. I'm going to get magenta instead because I want some positive, there's some positive veins too that are not negative painting, and I want to put a few of those on. And I think magenta is a good color for that. Got my liner brush. Let's to have some. Doesn't all have to be negative painting. It's quite a big one up here. So that when I come to do some of them up here, I've already got some more positive colors up there. And even here, some of these, you can see more of the pink or the magenta. I've just got magenta on my brush right now, on my liner brush, just to accentuate that color in some of those. Looking up here, it's just a couple that are a bit stronger. Right, so at this point, I am going to turn it up the other way, and I will turn my reference photo up the other way too, because I want to work on this area here. And if you can see, this area here is pretty blue. I'm going to be working mostly in cobalt blue in this area, a little bit of green here and really light here, so almost no painting up here, just here, and a little bit of maybe extra green here. I put that over there and look at my violet that I've been using with the cobalt blue is sort of running a little low, so let's get some more cobalt blue over here. And I want just cobalt blue on this side, and then a little bit of violet with the rose and the cobalt blue just down here. So I got a combination to go, again, dark next to light is what we're aiming for. And I want a 2 and a 4, and let's go darkest first. Darkest first is in here next to this light leaf. And remember, the edge of the leaf is very light, so we won't paint the edge of the leaf. I occasionally will switch to the more pinky violet and then go back to the more blue violet. Go back and forth. And remembering to keep the edge of the leaf just light. And you might wonder, what was the whole point of doing the wet and wet to start with? Well, it just gives you a lovely quick base color that you can form all your colors over, and it will glow through from underneath. Helps you with your negative painting because you've already got a few veins here and there. And it's very hard to work on white paper and get everything working correctly. So I started over on the left side of this with the pinky violet and then switched to the blue violet, and they're just going to blend together wet and wet. It's much more blue as I'm working up the cabbage leaf, so we're going to much more just cobalt blue. And making sure right up against this light leaf. It has to be good and intense and dark right next to the light leaf so that the light leaf shows up really well. I could even add a little bit of ultramarine blue to that mix because ultramarine blue is darker than cobalt. So it will take it down even darker in some spots. Don't want it like too thick or intense, just fairly dark as it comes next to that leaf. And of course then I can use my wet brush with barely any paint on it to just bring this out here. Switch to a little bit of pinky violet. We got a little bit of a change in color. Back to the blue. Suck that up with your brush so you can control it with your brush. Going to the greeny blue now. Some of them are a more greeny blue color shadow, so it's this one here. And coming up here. And some of the shadows that I've made with my wet in wet don't correspond to the photo at all. And that's all right. I'm just going to make them work. Just figure it out. Now, I'm putting a lot of water with my wash now because I want these ones to be very, very light. As we come up here, almost just barely any pigment, just very watery. This is almost like pure cobalt blue. Now I'm going to switch to a little bit of blue green with lots of water. And remember, it's watercolor. I don't need to be fussing to make my strokes absolutely perfect. A little bit of pinky green in there. Put on some pink, add a little bit of green. And work my way along back to the more blue color near the edge here. Switch to green. Almost no color. A little bit of blue and purple. I'm going to switch to my number 4, slightly bigger brush. And I want that green that has a little bit of phthalo in it to make it a bit brighter, a bit more intense, because on this corner again, I want a little bit more bright greens. I just add a little touch of phthalo to the green and the yellow to make it nice and bright. Negative painting these veins, being a bit quicker. We don't need it all to be fussy. Bigger brush, push in the green. Lots of water with the green. I'm just going to put very, get that on the camera. Very, very watery green here. Loads of water with it. And there's a leaf coming up here that's much more intense. So let's get a bit more intense green going. This one is darker. A little bit more blue, a little bit more yellow. And again, if I feel I got a little bit too much paint, suck a little bit up. Get my thirsty brush and just take a little bit off. And I think I need just a little bit more bluey green just in here. And I'm going to turn it back up the right way. I'm going to just zoom out a little bit so you can see, not so close up and intense, what everything looks like. There's not that much left to do for me anyway. I don't know how you're doing. You might be a little bit behind me. Put a little bit more in there. There's this side here is not dark enough. We need a bit more blue shadow on that side. So I want my Cobalt Blue and Rose Violet to add a little bit more. I'm pitch up the right way. A little bit more blue shadow on this side. I'll be careful, it's a little bit wet in places, so I'll be careful where I put my fingers and thumbs. And I'm mixing up, what I'm doing is just mixing up a bit more paint. So I've got plenty of paint here. And there's a little bit more shadow on this side. Then put it down, get your brush and control it, move it around, fade it in. Quite dark coming under this, there's shadow under this one here. And there's quite a big, it's like a sort of a dip in here that's quite dark. Along here. I just want to go to like Cobalt Blue for some of these shadows. Just here. I got to use my brush to just ease those colors in. Do a little bit, go into more pinky color. A little bit more negative painting along here. And back here is quite dark. And we also, I didn't work on this transition here where there's it's quite dark. Remember we had that dark edge here, and then we got this transition to the leaves underneath coming out that are quite dark too. So I've got to work on those. And I'm going in with my really dark purple that I make with the Quinacridone Magenta and the Phthalo Blue to get some dark in here. And again, what I put on here to start with is not what I leave there. I've got the paint on. I got my brush with no paint on. I'm going to pull that out. I'm actually going to put a little bit of pink paint on my brush, rosy color paint, to ease those colors out. A little bit of dark here. You can see what I mean about putting my hand around when they're up there. It gets awkward. And I can do a little bit more of that later if I need to add a little bit more dark. Now, we've done everything pretty much except these light leaves around the outside. So we have to be really, really careful to keep them nice and light. What they have to them is they have a tinge of green and a tinge of blue and a tiny bit of sort of pinky violet on the outside and a white frill around. So it's delicate and tricky. And this one, of course, curls around here with a bit of a shadow. So I think the best place to start is probably here, coming around to here with a very, very light blue-green here, leaving the white edge, coming up to the more pinky violet up here. And of course, it's fairly dark coming in here, but still the light edge. So the light green is your Azo Yellow and your Cobalt Blue. So we can mix it fairly dark to start with, and then add a lot of water to really lighten it up. And you need a little bit more blue. It's quite blue. And a bit more water to lighten it up. It's almost white. It just isn't pure white, but the more water you add, the lighter it's going to be. So I've added loads of water to that green. And I'm going to actually zoom in again so you can see. Wet this area first because I want to transition into what we painted a long time ago, but it's dry now. So I'll wet that first so I can get a wet in wet transition. Get that green that I just mixed up very, very pale, and put it on the outside of that wet area so it flows into the wet. And be really careful to negative paint again that dry white edge. And get a tiny bit more blue with that green, the tiny bit, and come along here with a slightly darker bluey green color. Keep the white edge dry. If it blends wet in wet, you can control that with your brush. Come down to the dry edge, leave a white streak there. Now I'm getting a little bit of yellow on my brush, clean brush, a little bit of yellow. I'm just going to put a tiny bit of yellow there because the green turns a little bit yellow there, and I want to put that in there. Up here. Now we will put some pinky purple in, but we need to get the greens in first. It gets more blue as it goes up this edge, so I'm adding a bit more of the wrong blue to that. Don't do what I said. I'm going to go back and put Cobalt Blue with it. I put Cerulean Blue with it, which is nothing like what we want. So I have just going to remix that Cerulean Blue with the yellow, and more blue and more water. There we go. And come up this edge. Leave the white edge. Now this is where it really transitions to the pinky purple. So going into the pinky purple, the one that's mostly rose. And we're just going to let it mix wet and wet with the green. That doesn't matter. It'll form some green grey colours. It'll be lovely. Just don't worry about that. And you can just come along that edge and add a little bit of that pinky lilac. Just, you can put it wet in wet on some of that edge. Just dip it on with the tip of your brush. Just put the tip of your brush onto that wet green paint and it should just flood in. We're not going to bother painting all of the veins and stuff on those leaves. Going into the more bluey violet, because as this comes around here, it gets a bit darker. It still has a little white edge to the leaf, but the shadow's a bit darker. And it sort of curls around. And disappears in here until you can barely tell which is which as it comes in here. Now I'm going to take a tiny bit of, just a tiny bit of magenta, little tiny bit of magenta. I'm going to add a bit there so it's more magenta-y right there. A little bit there, maybe not, maybe too dry for that there. Too dry for that there. And maybe a little bit of magenta just there. Just drop it in, like drop it right in. And this one here, this one coming back here is very blue. I'm just going to use a tiny bit of Cobalt Blue for this one, just a tiny, tiny bit. It has to be very watery. Very watery. And as it comes around here, it's even more blue around here. And if it sort of disappears into the other color, like here, we can put more dark in to make it stand out more. And get some magenta, watered down, of course, and very watered down because magenta is really strong. And I'm going to take some magenta again against here. And again, we might have to do a little bit more dark against that edge just to get it to show up. Ooh, it's a lot, isn't it? I'm getting tired. Now this one curls in here in the shadow, so I want quite a bit. I want a little bit of ultramarine blue with the cobalt blue to put this in the shadows under here. Go in the direction of the leaf, and that way you'll, if you paint in the direction that the leaf curves, then you'll get a good curve. Going to a little bit more pinky magenta, violet, coming down again, painting in the direction that the leaf curves down this way, and then it gets much lighter. So I've diluted my violet with a little bit of green and a little bit of water. And back to a little bit of pinky violet. And again, painting in the direction of the leaf. I'm sort of using a greeny blue. I'm mixing the blue and the green, starting off with a greeny blue, coming around, and then switching to the pinky violet to do the edges, and just letting those two blend wet in wet, keeping the white edge. Now they're a little bit too dark, so they're still very wet. I can do a little bit of manipulating, sucking up that color. It's so much easier to put the color on and suck it up than to get it just exactly right from the get-go, because you need the color nice and loose and wet to get the color on there, but then you need to control it. Now I've mixed the green and the cobalt blue because that's sort of the color of this leaf up here. More water needed. I can just add more water right here. And again, it's this color, this greeny blue color on the inside here, and then it's tinged with that sort of pinky magenta on the outside. So we'll put the greeny blue on first and get the pinky magenta, pinky violet-y color. We'll put that along the outside, leaving the white border. Doesn't matter if it doesn't go where you want it. Remember, you're gonna fix it once you've got it on there. Get it on there. Dry your brush off. Do a little bit of lifting and fixing. And you just get that tinge, that little tinge of pinkish violet along the edge. Going back to my cobalt blue, because as it turns around the corner here, it's very blue. So I'm going to put that blue in the turn here. It's kind of almost like a shell as it turns around here. And I'm going to get some magenta, my magenta violet, and come around here. It gets much darker as it turns around and goes in here. And put it on, use my brush to manipulate it. Right into the really magenta color now. It's curling away into the dark. I put a little bit of ultramarine blue with the magenta. Oops, you know what? The top layer is too wet for me to do that properly. So I'm going to have to make sure I dab the top layer and dry it. And come back and do the darkest part of that curl in a few minutes when it's dry. Even dry it with the hairdryer. Anytime you do have a flood like that or something, grab your Kleenex, just dab it up. You can work on, you can fix it later. It's not a big disaster as long as you have a Kleenex at the ready and you master the thirsty brush. So it's going to be quite a dark area that I will put in when that's all dry. And there's also a bit more shadow right here where it curls over there, makes a shadow. So really I'm almost finished, apart from that bit of shadow in there that I can't do yet because it's too wet. And sometimes I'll come back tomorrow and do when it's nice and dry, and do a few more finishing touches, such as a little bit more shadow in here, a little bit more shadow under some of the, say under these leaves. I could have a little bit more shadow. I usually do this the next day because I want everything to really dry and I want to have a really good look at everything and see what it's missing or what it needs before I make, before I'm finished. Before I think, well, that's pretty much done. I don't want to fiddle anymore. This area's kind of like here, where it could have a little bit more shading. And obviously up here. But you don't want to don't want to overdo it. Sometimes it just needs a little bit. Might need a little bit more of that pinky gray that I mixed up here. It just needs a little bit more shadow. And then I'll pull it back so you can see the whole thing. It's really important to see everything as a whole. Stand back from your painting, view it from a distance and see what you've got when you pull back and look at the whole painting. There's little things I feel like I just want a bit more intense green in some places. Corners, the corners really need to be carefully painted, because the corners are your entry points that bring the viewer into your picture. They point towards what's important, and they need to be painted. If they're left open, they're a bit sort of undone. Your viewer doesn't come in through the right door, so to speak. So I always like to get the corners well painted, putting a little bit more color in those ones. So all these lines, they point to the center of your cabbage. This is what you want your viewer to look at. There's a line here I don't like very much, and when it's really dry, I'm going to do a little bit more dark and fix up that shape. I don't like this shape here. I want to fix that with a little bit more dark paint. I can do that tomorrow when it's dry. I will do this little dark curl under here when it's really dry. And I've put a lot of paint on here, so it takes a while for all of that paint to dry. Even with a hairdryer, it just gets it sort of half dry, and then it needs a good 12 hours to get really dry. How did it go? I hope you enjoyed painting that. It was quite intricate, wasn't it? But fun colors, and I think they turn out well in the end. I'd like to remind you to subscribe and like if you can. It's really helping my channel to grow. And also I'm making my notes and line drawings and color pictures available on my Etsy shop, watercolorswithkaz.etsy.com. So I'll put the link below. So thank you very much for joining me. See you next time. Bye for now.